How we limit our creative selves to a specific style when editing or creating any form of graphical or visual medium is aesthetic. Aesthetic is the reason I stick with a specific graphical style and format for my videos. It's the reason why anyone ever uses a contained art style to express how they prefer their content to look. To an extent, everyone has their own aesthetic. My handwriting is unique to me alone, and it stays consistent. I rate my A's the same way every time. This to me is a good example of a general aesthetic. It's basic, but it works. Aesthetic is me choosing to mostly use a blurred outline in comparison to a rough outline. People mostly associate the term aesthetic with the memeified vaporwave aesthetic, but the definition goes much further than the meme itself. I'm not sure whether to call it a meme or a culturally enjoyed art form. I would like to take a moment to use vaporwave aesthetic as an example of the way in which we label different styles of art. My channel doesn't follow a specific aesthetic. It goes by my own perception of what I like. In a sense, making my own aesthetic. So in a way, there are an infinite amount of different aesthetical types, if aesthetic is simply how we pair different likenesses of art, that is. I'm not here to go over the vaporwave aesthetic though. I'm more interested in the term itself, how it's applied, and how we express ourselves through the use of art. What makes me like one thing over another? Going back to the outline example, why is it that I like the smooth look of the blurry outline more compared to the straightforward and rough look of the normal outline? I guess it's just the brain choosing favorites. But in my work, you can clearly see what I like more. I like it, so I apply it. I could do the research and find out why specifically my brain likes one over the other, but it all leads back to the why game. The why game is basically when you just keep asking why. Let's say I found out. Well, from there you could just ask, why is the brain that way and not some other way? Aesthetic really comes down to preference of art. To say it in the most plain and basic way possible, my art style is the way it is because I like it. I don't use something that I dislike. There is a bit more to it though. There are a multitude of different art styles that I find appealing, but the ones I choose to use more properly convey my personality. It's not so much that I like my art style the best, as I think it's the best for me. The art I use is chosen from questions like these. What can I most easily work with? What best expresses my personality? What do I find appealing? And what do I think other people will find appealing? I can't please everyone though. We all have our own opinions on what we prefer in art. Meaning art is subjective? The art being subjective versus objective discussion is a fascinating one to me. Is there such a thing as an objective aesthetic? If objective is to refer to an object, as in something that factually exists, and subjective is to refer to a subject, like something that we give our opinions on, then where does aesthetic fall? Because aesthetic is not only a subject, but an object, when being specific that is. We can talk about the subject of aesthetic, or we could observe the object of a specific aesthetical style. When having the discussion, most people tend to think that art has to be one or the other, when in reality it's both objective and subjective. Most forms of media are both actually. The standard of quality of a painting will always remain objective, but our opinion on how good a painting is will continue to remain subjective. We can't factually say that one specific painting is better than another, but we can factually say the quality of it based on the time spent making it and the amount of detail. Factually, the Mona Lisa has more quality to it than this drawing of a stick figure I made. Art is primarily subjective though. When we look at a painting, we have our own opinion on how good it looks. There's no reason to argue with opinion, but there's reason in arguing about opinion. What I mean by this is there are ways to make everything about opinion. I'll give a demonstration. I stated that the quality is determined by the amount of time spent and detail. I claimed it to be objective, but you could simply state that it's my opinion that more detail makes quality. If you had an opposing opinion, as to say less detail makes quality, then did that change it to a subjective conversation? Well, to an extent it did. Art has more or less changed from an objective thing to a subjective thing over time. Our standard of art is much lower. You can see this with things like modern art. But the standard has been lowered because of the conversation of subjectivity. I can state that objectively, this picture is green. You can work around that though, by declaring that our perception of color is a human bias. We are aware that there are different colors, but we can't truly say that what we are seeing is green. And why can't we? Well, because of science. We simply interpret the light waves reflecting off of a plant as green. That doesn't factually mean that the plant is literally green though. If you want to make anything about opinion, you simply have to state, well, in your opinion, 2 + 2 = 4. That's a fact. Until someone comes along and says, well, in my opinion, it equals 5. You can show them all the different ways to prove that it really does equal 4, like showing them literal objects. But they could just state, what you think is the number 4, I think is 5, making it no longer about logic and more about the word. The debate could just continue from there. But here is how to prove the existence of objectivity. The one debating that it equals 5 was forced to move to our interpretation of the word because he was proven that in the physical universe, this quantity of objects is what we have labeled as 4. And adding 2 similar quantities of objects that we have labeled as 2 each would add up to make 4. Sounds confusing, but really the whole conversation boils down to this. You can debate that anything is either objective or subjective. So when debating about art, it's best to just say that it can be either. I can't claim to have enough of an understanding to declare with certainty one or the other. How we express ourselves through art comes down to our opinion. Scientifically, it's what our brain finds most visually stimulating. But, you know, I'm glad we all have different opinions about things, because the Earth would be a really boring place if we didn't.